Hello, this is Douglas Robinson with Synapse Software. You may have heard my name before. I used to work with Beyond 20 a long, long time ago. I also used to have my own business where I used to do a lot of YouTube videos under the name Def Edit Software and later Trebuchet Software. And now I'm with Synapse Software. And I am developing a lot of things on Cortex. And if you're seeing the screen here, if you're familiar with Cortex, there are a lot of new things on the side of the screen. And what we're going to be talking about today is going to be email monitoring. So for email monitoring, there are multiple different things that we're going to be able to set up. Our initial demo, our initial release of email monitoring is going to include a integration with Halo ITSM. You'll be able to listen to incoming tickets in an email inbox, in a particular folder, and you'll be able to create a ticket in Halo, for instance. We're also working on functionality to be able to create tickets in other systems that you'll be able to define on the fly using API connections. So for instance, one of the parts of our email monitor involves configuring one or multiple data sources, one of which is Halo, but one of which is also potentially at some point in the future, this is probably not going to be in the first implementation, but an API data source where you can actually consume Swagger documents and define different endpoints and tell it, this is how you create a record in this system, so that if there's a particular system that we don't have an integration for, you will be able to still listen for emails in a particular mailbox and create records in an external system. But the first iteration of this is going to have a complete Halo integration. Well, I say complete. Probably won't be as complete as some other people would hope, but it will be a functional Halo integration. So without further ado, the way that we're going to set this up, there's basically three different components that we have to do before we can start listening for mail, with the first of which is being we have to define a mailbox. So we can go and set up a new mailbox. I'm going to edit the one that I've got. There's two different types of mailboxes that we support for the current moment. First one is Microsoft through the Microsoft Graph API. This is what I think most of the people who end up using Cortex for email monitoring are going to end up using. We also have support for IMAP. If you are a Google Workspace user, at the moment you're able to connect to that using IMAP. I think you end up having to use a special app password. We may end up adding the full Google Auth support at some point if somebody asks for it. If you are seeing this video and you're interested in our email monitoring solution and you have Google Workspace, please let us know, because we've asked everybody and almost everyone has told us no, we use Microsoft. So we're trying to gauge the interest on that one. Currently, we have support for Microsoft and IMAP. Uh, Configure that for Microsoft. You need an email address, client ID, client secret, tenant ID. Um, I don't know if I'll end up blurring these or not because they're all truncated on the screen. But yeah, those are the three, four basic things that you'll end up needing to configure for this. You'll need to, if you are a lowly application administrator, like I was at some of my roles, you probably don't have the ability to configure those all on your own. You probably have to reach out to an Exchange admin, a Microsoft admin at your organization to get those. There's a button to test the authentication once you've entered them. There's also something you'll notice in a couple of different sections of our app. Sorry, I had to pause to take a breath there for a moment. In a couple of different sections of Cortex that we're going to look at today, there's going to be some very handy debugging tools that you can use for troubleshooting if something's not working the way you expect. The first of those is going to be on this mailbox configuration page. So if I am troubleshooting something that's in my email monitor that's not getting processed correctly, and for instance, I want to know, is it in my email inbox or not? We can actually go to this browse page. You can see the different folders that are available in our mailbox, and I can click check for mail, and it says there's nothing in there. By default, this is going to check for unread mail. I click this little checkbox and I click check for mail again. You'll actually see the first, I think, 10 emails that are in the inbox. Um, I think this is a great feature. This is something I was really passionate about making sure that I built, because when I was doing email monitoring as, an administrator in Sharewell, I always had trouble with if something's not actually getting processed by the email monitor. If you don't have access to the mailbox, it's very, very difficult to troubleshoot why it's not getting picked up. You'll see some other things that we have for troubleshooting things in the email monitor later as well, but this is one of the ones that I think is very cool. So I'm going to save that. The next big step we have to do is we have to configure a data source that we're going to send data to. Now, in this video, we're going to be doing Halo. I've got some other ones on my screen for testing some other functionality, and one of them is a silly pet store example for testing out our Swagger API module. You can ignore that one because that's just a internet example. But for Halo, let's talk about Halo. For this, I really need to stop saying So for this, we have a couple of different pieces of information we have to fill out, and I should blur these on the screen. Hopefully I remember to do that. They are a Halo authorization URL, resource URL, client ID, and client secret. And these come from your Halo system. And if you're not very familiar with Halo, but you have the ability to define these, I'll show you where you can get them. You go to your configuration screen, your integration screen, you go to Halo ITSM API. Here are the first two URLs. The second set of values, you need to go to view applications and you need to define, where is it? A new application. So if you click test here, you say, I want a client ID and secret for services authentication. Here's your client ID. Here's your secret. You tell it to log in as an agent. You would ideally have a specific agent for it to log in as. And then on the permission side, you would need to define what permissions it has. You could be very lazy and give it all permissions. I would definitely not recommend that. We'll have in our documentation specifically what the minimums are. To be honest with you, I don't remember off the top of my head what they are. And that's basically it. So you get those values, you copy and paste them in here for your data source connection details. You click test. This is going to double check whether it can actually get an authentication token on the back end. And then we go to this screen that says import configuration. This is by default only going to import ticket types in Halo that are considered active. So technically you can set a ticket type in Halo to not be active to where people can't actually request it anymore. This filters those out. If for some reason you needed to include those in here, there is a checkbox available if you have a special debugging mode on. Not all of these buttons are actually going to be available to the end user or to the administrator unless you have this debugging mode on. But yeah, you can technically filter this out to show the items that aren't active. You can have it show only the items that aren't active. And then we have our import Halo configuration button. And I really like this button. What this does is this imports a list of all of the ticket types. So all of the different types of tickets that you can submit in Halo. It also imports categories, teams, and a couple of specific lookup values. And we have a very nice little testing interface that you can use to double check, or troubleshooting interface that you can use to double check what information is coming in from Halo into Cortex and how it's getting parsed. So you won't see these by default, but if you're troubleshooting an issue if something's not working properly in Halo, we might actually ask you, hey, can you go bring up these screens and let us know, is something appearing properly in Cortex or not? Yeah, basically that's what we have for that. Once you've done your import configuration, you get this screen that says import complete. and the save button is flashing at you. Click save, and then we can go to define monitors. So on the monitor screen, these are going to be very similar to your email monitoring defs in Sharewell. I wish I had a visual example on my screen, but I don't know if I have Sharewell installed on this machine anymore. Your email monitoring defs, those were a definition for an email monitor for one particular mailbox, or to be more accurate, one particular folder in a mailbox. And that's essentially what these are going to be. If you have multiple different folders in the same mailbox, you're going to need different monitors, one for each folder. And if you have different mailboxes, you're going to need one for each mailbox. I've got one that's defined here already, and we're going to walk through it. On the first screen here, you'll notice there's several different sections when we're editing or creating an email monitor. There's name, there's description, there's a checkbox for whether or not it's processing. When you first define one of these, I exit out of it, the checkbox for enabled, it is not checked by default. That is so once you finish defining your email mailbox, you actually have to take a conscious step to turn it on. There's a mailbox screen where you can pick which email account you're going to use and which folder in that email account you're going to use. There's also a skip list section here. This is where you can define specific rules for email items that should never be processed. A great example of this would be your out of office or other types of automatic responses that need to be just filtered out and not actually processed. Under this customer section, there is currently there's only one way to look up a customer, and it's by the email address. We have a couple of other options that we've toyed around with that we haven't completely built and tested yet. So this is likely in the first iteration just going to be one option. And there's a spot to define a default customer by their ID. This is specific to Halo, and it might end up moving onto a different screen because of where the rest of the configuration for Halo is. And we're going to talk about that in maybe another minute or so. There's a rules screen where you can define one or many email monitoring rules for a particular monitor. These are, for instance, if you're familiar with Sharewell, these are going to be your different types of subject lines and other conditions that you're going to be checking for. So if I open up an email monitoring rule, you can define matching criteria where you're searching for particular content in the subject or the body. You can also define whether it needs to find a record in one of the linked data sources like Halo, and whether it should be looking for that record in the subject line, the body, text before and after particular tags. This might change over time to be a little bit more granular, but for the moment, you'll have just these options here. And the end stage of defining an email monitoring rule is options for creating a Halo ticket. There's a couple of other options here that we're not going to go over in depth in this video, like updating a Halo ticket by adding a note to it, which is analogous. Again, if you're familiar with Sharewell, like I am, uh, adding a note in Halo is more or less the same as adding a journal note. So that's what I always think of when I see that inside of Halo. That at the moment, if I bring that up, it literally just asks you for the data source that it's going to use so it can get the configuration, and it hard codes the content of the email as a journal note inside Halo. If you decide that you're going to create a ticket in Halo, you get options for field mapping. So you can pick which ticket type you're going to be creating via email. For instance, if I pick incident, I can see all of these fields for the incident ticket type. If I pick, we'll just go through a couple of these. Major incident, I can see these fields. If I pick technical task, I can see these fields. Before I go any further with that, I want to talk about a couple of other things. We have a couple of options for interacting with APIs. So you can have unauthenticated API calls. There's going to be a concept of calling a web service, which is going to be, well, I'll explain it a different way. There's an option for an unauthenticated API request where you can just punch in a URL, the body content, you can send the data from the email to it. There's going to be an option for calling a web service where you can actually pick a particular web service and then you can fill out what endpoint you're going to be consuming and fill out actual parameter values for it. Um, that's not really what we're going to go over in this email, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And there's another feature where you can run a Cortex action. That is going to be coming down the road a little bit, so I don't know if that'll be available at the exact moment that we release email monitoring, but there will be another section of Cortex where you can define what we're calling Cortex actions, and those are going to be fun and exciting, and I don't have nearly enough time to talk about them, but there will be an option to run them either on their own through that fun little section over there or from an email. So the purposes of this video, we're going to talk about creating a Halo incident from an email. We have a couple of different field options here. Hello. Oh, I broke my data source dropdown by selecting that other option when I was on the other action type, and then it broke things for a moment. That's very funny. That will be fixed, I swear. So we have some field mappings here. Depending on which field we pick, like assign team, for instance, you'll see some of those validated values that we looked at earlier when we were looking at the data source. So I can pick something like first line support. You'll see some values like how this is being tracked on the back end for the field ID, and then the actual values that you're entering, like field name and field value. For category, we've got a validation for categories, and they show up basically the same way that they show up inside of Halo. For impact and urgency, we have lookup values. And then you'll notice in this dropdown, there is not summary and details. That is because we have a separate section for them where you can define a summary and a details value using values from the email. So we have a very poorly looking context menu action here where you can insert very obvious text tokens like body, subject, to address, from address, sent, date, time. We might add to these over time, but this is probably what it's going to look like in the first implementation. And you can customize what this template is going to look like when you have it inside your system, like Halo or wherever else you're able to send this to. That's basically it for our email monitoring action. So this is a good example of oh, I created a new one and then I just saved it. That's really funny. I'm going to get rid of that one. Sorry, I had intended to not click the save button on that. It's really funny. So that's an example of an email monitoring action on an email monitoring rule. There's also a concept of a default rule. And you'll notice I've got a couple of these here that are checked, but not all of them are enabled. If you have an email monitor that's marked as default, it does not have the same tabs up at the top of the screen as we showed before. So normally you'll see an option for determining how it should match that particular rule and whether it runs against existing incidents. There's also an option for a default, and you'll notice I've got some test ones that are just turned off at the moment that aren't enabled, like this one is. On this default one, because it is enabled, we just have a normal action to create a Halo ticket. Here's how I have that one set up. Click save. Before I move on, there's options for on success actions and on error actions, such as marking something as read, deleting it, moving it to another folder or another mailbox. And for on errors specifically, there's going to be an option for sending an alert to a particular email address. Right now, this is a static alert. There will probably be an option to customize a template for this at some point, but at the moment it's going to be, and probably for the first release, it's probably just going to be a static template. And those are our options for email monitors. So with all of that out of the way, I know I've been babbling for a long time, close to 20 minutes now. With all of that configured, we can now actually process some email, which is really cool. And my favorite way to do that for this demo is to go into my mailbox and just unleash the floodgates. And we're going to have a bunch of stuff come in all at once. I'm going to hit refresh. And in a couple of seconds, oh, look at that. We have a bunch of mail coming in. And look at that. A lot of it's already been processed. That was fast. Look at that. We have, I think it's 30 mail items come in all at once. They are getting processed in real time. And you'll notice some of these failed. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It was intentional, I swear. It wasn't, this one wasn't a bug like the data source thing earlier. I'm just going to wait until these items at the top finish, because it's pulling them in small batches, basically. Okay, and while I wait for that, I'm going to go through how some of these look. It's the one I want in here yet? No. So on this screen, this is our email monitoring status screen. You can see a couple of different things. There's processed items, there's in progress items. If something's hasn't reached its final state, it's going to show in progress, even if it says success or error. You'll notice the ones that are in their final state for error will eventually say error actions applied. If it's in progress and success and it hasn't marked it as red, deleted it, moved it to a folder, it's still going to show up in progress until it actually gets moved to that particular folder. And then once it's in that final folder, it'll say processed. Oh, I'm running out of breath. So anyways, we have all these items here. There are some buttons on the side of the screen where you can look at these. For instance, if I click on this one, this is a very lengthy email. It's a fun example. This is a particular email. We can show which monitor it was picked up with. So I've got a monitor that's labeled IT support. There's a rule. We show the actual rule that it matched with, which is create a Halo ticket. And then the rest of this is just data from the email. This is currently just in plain text, but if you want, you can download the email. If you click download email, click on that, you can see the content of this email message. So this one is from Pipe Dream. There's content in this email that's not showing up in Thunderbird, but you'll see it in a moment. If I go to this tab that says processing logs, you can see processing logs, which is cooler than it sounds. So you can see information like how it's selecting the default customer because it wasn't able to match a user to this email address. It starts trying to create a Halo ticket. For fun, we can actually see here's the JSON that it sends to Halo, which is very fun. Gets back a response with the ticket ID and all of the JSON for the response. And there's also options to clear these logs and retry processing, which we'll do on some of those items that failed earlier when I get around to talking about those finally. And if it succeeds in creating a ticket, there's a button that says View in Halo. I click on that. Look at this. This is the same email, but with the remote content that I was saying wasn't showing up in Thunderbird. This is our ticket in Halo. In the subject line, we have the summary, or we have the subject line of the email. In the body, we have a bug because my template's not showing up. I think this only affects HTML. We'll get that sorted out. For plain text, the template shows up fine. For HTML, I'm just noticing right now, this moment, it does not show up in the, probably not at all. It's probably buried in the HTML markup, which is pretty funny. But it shows up. On the right-hand side of the screen, we can see we've assigned this to the team that we selected. And there it is. We have the category that we picked out, the impact, the urgency, so on and so forth. If I go back to Cortex and I find one that's definitely plain text and I view it in Halo, there you can see the template that we defined for the body and or for the details field in the summary. So a little bit buggy when we have HTML content, but on the bright side, we do process HTML content. And I think it's so cool that if you include a GIF in an email and it comes through Cortex and it comes into Halo, that GIF plays inside of Halo. So good job, Halo. That's very cool. What else is there? Items that failed. So you can see I marked, I think, what was it, 30? Something like that. I marked several emails as unread at once, which is the equivalent of all of them coming into a mailbox at the same time, right? Cortex is able to process many different mail items at the same time. In fact, we have a fun little stress test internally where we just send in hundreds and hundreds of them at once. And we just check for, hey, is there a memory leak? Is everything working right? Let's process 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 emails, and it just chunks through them in large batches at once. It's very likely that Cortex will be able to process more mail at one particular moment in time than it can submit into Halo. Because in Halo, what we have discovered is there is a very fun bug where, where is it? Violation of primary key, cannot insert duplicate key. Duplicate key value is a ticket number. There's a very fun bug in Halo where if you submit multiple tickets through the API at the same time, it will assign more than one of them the same ticket number when it's trying to save them. So we are probably going to have a little background service where you optionally can have these automatically retry at least one time or maybe a configurable number of times. But if this happens, at least at the moment, we can clear these logs out and we can tell it, retry processing this Halo ticket. And now it's created. Also, you don't have to click the clear logs button, but you can actually like clear them out, reprocess it, and it works fine. And that is basically everything that I have here. I'm going to delete everything out of my table. Uh, yeah, that's basically it. If you have any questions about our email monitoring solution, if you have any feedback on what we've gone over in this video, or any other questions, concerns, things you think we missed, things I left out of this video because I didn't plan it properly, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, or feel free to reach out to us either via email, through our website, through our Discord. Very recently, we did open a Discord, and so on and so forth. Thanks.